Hello, this is Lee Bannister, the narrator and one of the co-producers of the ATV Land DVD documentaries. Welcome to the first part of a special presentation of a promotional talk I was asked to give to a group of visitors to Tipton Library in September 2013. Our first DVD from ATV Land in Colour had been released in 2011, followed by From Headlines to Tightlines, the story of ATV Today in 2012. This talk concentrates on our second documentary, which focuses on the Midlands News Magazine Programme ATV Today, and in this part of the talk I'll concentrate on its early years. So sit back, relax, and I'll let the Community Library Manager, Robert Hazel, introduce me.
So without fear or favour, I'd like to welcome Lee Bannister to the library. Lee's the co-producer, there's the main interviewer and the narrator. Two DVDs that were published on ATV Studios, and what he's going to do is show a short clip and talk about them. So can we give Lee Bannister a
Thank you very much. Right, we'll kick off by, I've got a small version of the main programme that I'm going to be talking about today, so I'll play you the version of that so you know what we're talking about.
ATV, when it was setting itself up in the Midlands, had to build from scratch. It had nothing whatsoever. It converted a cinema into a studio, and then of course it had to get all of the extra facilities like film and all the things it required.
In the early days we didn't have much equipment, and we would be given one sound camera and about 6 people with mute cameras tearing around the Midlands, but you had to decide what to do with the sound camera. And could you get more than one story up? Because if you went over to Nottingham, would you be able to do a good story that happened to be down in Gloucester? And sometimes made it and sometimes we didn't.
It's a long time ago, and it's at the time when fog was quite a regular thing. And I can remember Reggie Harcourt on regular occasions actually walking to the studios with the news scripts.
We were interchangeable. Sometimes we were writing scripts to go with film. Sometimes we were on the news desk trying to get extra information. Sometimes we would be the reporter out on the scene. So it was quite varied, which of course was good experience.
I'd been on various local papers, the Sutton Coldfield News, the Sunday Mercury and the Leicester Mercury. And I didn't know what to do next. I was 21. And I thought, well, I could go on a national newspaper, or I could try this new thing, television. And I wrote and said, well, I haven't been to university, but I am interested in television. How do I qualify? The naivety was that, of course, there were no qualifications to work in television then, especially as a reporter.
She was everybody's sweetheart. She was great to work with. She was good fun. I mean, she's always big old smile. She had one of those faces when they smile, the sun comes out, but it really did. And I think that's why people loved her, and she was very natural.
John Swallow was a reporter extraordinaire. He just sort of observed life, really. There'd never be room for a guy like him in television today, because he just went out and made very quirky films.
John Swallow was my first ever boss. I think he had some label called features editor, whatever that meant. It meant basically just had expenses. We used to go to the pub and lot. He was the most energetic, clever little guy. Very, very clever. Amazing imagination.
He and the late Peter Green were getting rather drunk in a pub in Ulster, and this lady has got a pet duck, the landlady, and Swallow says, that's a racing duck. She said, what do you mean? That is a top racing duck. We've got one at ATV today. And she said, have you? There are no cameras there, they're just having a drink. He said, we'll have a race. So they advertised this race, the pub, and 10,000 people turned up at the banks. And there was the ATV Today racing duck in ATV Today colours, and her duck. Nothing happened, because it wasn't. They weren't racing ducks. I don't know what a racing duck is. And 10,000 people went home on this bank holiday really disappointed.
Well, this was the great mix of ATV Today. You got hard news done at length when required, but not every day. You had always had a celebrity when possible. There was a period when we used to have a pop group. People would come in and record a number for us. Then there was the specialties like gardening and then of course sport. So it was a great mix.
Billy Wright was a very famous man, the most famous person I've ever met, who never chose to remind you. I mean, he was the most modest guy, never refused an autograph. Remembered names. There were 1,000 people working in that ATV building. He knew every single name, and everybody in the building loved him.
Here was Billy Wright, who played 105 times for England. He was just retiring. He just got married to Joy Beverley, who was a chart-topping singer. Echoes here, later of Beckham and, you know, Posh. They were a very glamorous couple.
Billy was one of those, his name just transcended anything and everything. Everybody knew him. Letters would be sent from all over the world. Billy Wright, England, all found him.
Terry Thomas's programme was Angling Today, and even for those who'd never picked up a fishing rod, it was a good watch.
Terry just did a few notes, said, OK, roll the film for half an hour, and he would then go through the most beautiful descriptive commentary without making a single fluff or whatever. And people can't do that anymore.
I was about to link to him as part of the ATV Today sports programme, and I suddenly realised there was a really loud noise coming from my right. And it was Terry. And I looked at the floor manager, and the floor manager looked at me, and he went over, and from what I remember, he had to nudge him, because I was just about to say, so let's catch up with all the news now on the fishing. Here's Terry. And off he went, you know.
When I first got there, I'd been there about a fortnight, and I was looking particularly shaggy. I needed a haircut. And I said to John Swallow, of all people, who's very stupid on me, I said, can you tell me somewhere where I can go and get me a haircut? And he said, well, I go to Wolverhampton. He said, but there's some very good ones in Birmingham. Go and ask Peter Plant, because he has a really good hairdresser. So I didn't really know this Peter Plant bloke. He's a very tall, straight, ex-barrister, a very sort of proper-sounding bloke. And I said, I'm really sorry, but could you tell me, John Swallow says you know a really good hairdresser. And he went, how dare you? Look, I'm really sorry. Don't you take the piss out of my wig. Look, I'm really sorry. I didn't know. And he had these ridiculous things, one of which was called Cicero. I forget the names of the others. They were like, you know, Euclid and Aristophanes, whatever. But the one he was wearing, I'm wearing Cicero, and you could never hope with your silly blonde hair to look like Cicero. I'm really sorry I asked. I'll go to a cheap barber. I'm sorry, whatever. So we never got off to a great start. But after that, I realised that actually he was a good lad.
Billy Wright, he was head of sport and outside broadcast at ATV, and he was looking for a new sports presenter, so he decided to invite me to join. It was a no-brainer from my point of view. As soon as I got offered it, I leapt at it. Forgot to sort out the money as well, went on the same money. Took me a few years to get that right.
How did I get into television? Not by a particularly conventional way. It was meeting a man in a pub. And the man on this occasion was John Swallow. And he told me he was leaving, and he was going to leave to run the family business, which I think was involved in quarrying or gravel, something like that. And this was his leaving drink. So I said, so there's a vacancy then across the road? And he said, yes, there is. So I scampered across the road and knocked on the door, the editor's door, and I said, I understand you've got a vacancy. And the editor said, my God, he said, you're quick off the mark. And I'm cutting a long story short, but he said, I think we'll give you a go. And that's how I got into television.
I wrote this famous letter that people seem to know all about, where I just sat down, God knows what was in me, but I sat down and wrote. The phrases included, I am the face of the 70s. This is your last chance to snap me up. ATV and Yorkshire Television from Leeds both wrote me a letter, to my amazement, going, we would like to come and meet up with you in London, if you're in London or wherever you are. I was actually in Dorset fishing for about 2 months and I didn't want to be disturbed really. Or you could come to us for an interview. So I went to ATV in Birmingham and I got the train up to Leeds. And I think they were just kind of intrigued to see what sort of a nutter wrote this letter. And to my own whatever, both of them offered me a week's work on the sort of equivalent of the 6 o'clock show. And I don't know why, actually I thought probably it was just more fun. I went to Birmingham.
I had to teach Chris how to do spoken word writing as opposed to written word writing, and a bit plodding he probably thought I was, because he was always of an anarchic bent.
And I do remember once we'd all been out for quite a long lunch, me and John Swallow and Peter Green particularly, and we came back. I can't can't believe we ever got shows out of this programme. We came back about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the worst for Fane Way and pints of Bankses. And Reg was going, oh, no, I'm sorry, Minister, there's some ruffians coming. Quiet, all of you, be quiet. And we go, shut up, Reg, you silly old fool. So Reg is carrying on. He's talking to someone like the Home Secretary or someone. And we grabbed him by his ankles and put him upside down in a dustbin. But Reg, being the wonderful professional that he is, carries on this, yes, that's right, Secretary, no, I agree. Yes, no, I agree, I think policy-wise you're making the right decision, and all this stuff. And we're literally, this pair of feet are coming up, we're bouncing them up and down his head. Oh, God.
I came on a 6-month contract, and you were a newsreader reporter. And rather like, you know, ITN do with the 2 newsreaders, newscasters as they call them, they took 2 of the news reporters and you did a 2-handed newsread. During the day, you went out filming. And of course, in those days, going out filming from here, you could, as likely as not, be in Lincoln, Nottingham, Stoke, other side of, Oxford, huge area, but it was never dull.
I got approached actually by Trevor East of ATV, who was one of the sort of official guys at ATV Sport, to see if I'd be interested in having a go at television, because they were expanding their sports coverage and they were going to have a half-hour programme every Friday night, and they needed a reporter to get out on the road to supplement what Gary Newbon was doing.
Nick Owen and I go back a lot further than you might think, because we were at prep school together in a little prep school in Shrewsbury, and he was just ever so slightly younger than me. I know he looks a bit older, but he was actually a little bit younger than me, is a little bit younger than me.
He's got one serious weakness, of course, which is a Luton Town fan. And I've kind of had this conversation with him for years, and I almost feel sorry for him, I think. But a terrific guy, good broadcaster, very professional.
The programme was not just about local news, which often, to be honest, could be quite boring and quite serious. It had to have a kick to it in the second half, which brought in not only the sport and the personalities, but also brought in lovely features and film features from around the region, because it's a very big region.
I have to say that I think the features, some of the features that we had for ATV Today were beautifully crafted. They were lovely pieces, lovely set to music and so on. Perhaps a bit too soft by today's standards, but I think they still bear watching.
There were all sorts of things happening or that were part of our local history that we also considered part of our news, which is quite interesting when I think about it looking back, because these days they wouldn't be considered news, or even a magazine item actually. They just wouldn't hit the airwaves, I suppose.
When you look back through the list of the stories, I mean, some you remember, some you don't. Derek Robinson, who led the big strike at British Leyland, Red Robbo as he was known, Michael Edwards, or Sir Michael Edwards as he became, brought in at British Leyland, little guy from South Africa who came in, he was going to beat everybody with a big stick. Unions were hugely powerful then, but bear in mind that a lot of the economy in the Midlands, primarily in Birmingham, but it did stretch down, the tool makers who worked at Cowley in Oxfordshire. It was a big business, and it just seemed like every other day there was a fresh industrial problem.
What is so interesting for me now to reflect on some of the stuff that I did when I was at ATV all those years ago, because you talk to people who then were, say, youngsters just making their way, and you weren't to know whether they'd be successful or not. And one that stands out for me is someone who we used to see a lot socially, because he was a particular friend of Gary Newbon's. He's a young guy who had ambitions to become a Formula One racing driver, Nigel Mansell.
Trevor East and I used to give him £1 to go down while we were waiting to finish the programme before I went off to play him squash, give him £1 to go and get the sandwiches out of the canteen. I don't think I'd be getting Nigel Mansell to go for the sandwiches these days.
But the nice thing was that when he was the world motor racing champion, he never forgot all the people who'd sort of, gone and done pieces like that with him. And when he went to a health farm down in Wales, went there, and I mean, it wasn't a question that he said, come and do it, and we did it, but he was obviously going to do very well.
They were looking at ATV for a girl to come in and be a sidekick as presenter to Bob Warman. He'd been doing the show on his own for some time.
Wendy Nelson was one of the first, may have been the first, of my screen wives. And I've heard her since claim that I didn't want her around as a screen wife, but I certainly did. I mean, she was very easy on the eye, and she was good fun to present with.
So I didn't have an audition or anything, I just turned up, and I don't think anybody had actually told Bob that this was going to happen. So for 2 or 3 weeks he was very sceptical, and then one night things went wrong and the film didn't work, and we had to fill for a couple of minutes, and I managed to do it with him quite happily. After that we were fine. But I was the first of many Warman wives.
I think I was very lucky to be involved in reporting the Black Country at a time when the Black Country itself was news, and recording the history of the Black Country had become news, because a lot of people were taking it very seriously and taking the importance of industrial history seriously.
I think I've said in the past I enjoyed working on ATV Today, and I enjoyed being with people like John Swallow and Chris Tarrant, and they made it fun.
The old ATV Today was a much softer programme for perhaps a softer time, and I think the audience was probably more relaxed. It was at a time when everybody finished work at about 4:30. They were back home, feet up in front of the box, ready for a good evening's viewing, and we laid down the platform for that evening's viewing. That's why we got such a fantastic rating in those days as well.
But they were really good local programmes, really good news programmes, and the sport was fantastic. I mean, it was a real privilege to be part of it.
We had such a good time, us guys. We had a great time, and I think it came over on screen. I think, you know, you were very much part of everybody's tea time, and they knew you as their mates, whereas I think now, you know, news reporters and current affairs people are a little bit more distant from the audience. I think now it's like, oh, here's Tarrant, here's Swally, here's Breen, here's CJ. It was very much like part of, you know, Midland culture. And I think that's sad. I think we had the best of it. We had such a laugh. I mean, I have to say, some days, and the more I sort of look back at some of this stuff, how the hell we ever got a show on air at 6 o'clock, I don't know. I mean, really, just, you know, we've got the political editor upside down in a dustbin. And just, I mean, but we had a great time.
And that's it. That'll give you an idea what it's all about. But that story that Tarrant was talking about, it was Reg Harcourt. He was on the phone to a minister in London or something, asking for some opinion. And without interrupting the conversation at all, John Swallow and Chris Tarrant came in, picked him up, turned him upside down, stuck him in a dustbin while he was still on the phone. They say, yes, Minister, and all this business. So that's what he was talking about on that one. But thank you for coming today. My name's Lee Bannister. I'm the interviewer on that programme, narrator and co-producer. There's a group of 3 or 4 of us who put that programme together. And we've done 2 programmes. The first programme, we've got some cards here about it. From ATV Land in Colour was the story of the ATV Studios over in Birmingham. ATV became Central, became Carlton. It's now all part of one big, you know, ITV company. And the second DVD, which is this one, is the story of ATV Today, called From Headlines to Tight Lines. And the tight lines reference is, and if you remember, Terry Thomas, the fishing expert, that was his catchphrase, tight lines. You know, as a sort of a goodbye thing. But our group got together, so there's a core of 3 or 4 of us, and then another group of maybe 5 or 6. We all got together on the internet. We didn't know each other beforehand, but we all got together on the internet on a website devoted to ATV. It's ATV Land, we call it. And we noticed that when Pebble Mill, the BBC's base in Birmingham, was demolished 10 years ago next year, they made a documentary about it. It was only a half-hour thing, and somebody said, well, why don't you do something about ATV, the studios? And we said, no, they'll never do that. And somebody else said, well, why don't we do it ourselves? So we got no experience in that area. But we just got in touch with a few people, said, would you like to share with us your reminiscences? We were going to just put it on the internet, you know, as one of these little videos that you can click and download or watch. But then we got MACE, who are the media archive for Central England. We got them involved. They liked what we were doing. They said, we can give you some clips from the old programmes to include in your shows, and we'll release it as well. So we said, go on then, and we gave it a go, and that led to the second one. Now we've got 2 out. The first one is 4 hours, which is the story of the old studios, and the second one, this one, is 6 hours, 4 episodes of an hour and a half each. So, you know, you just sit back, watch one and nod off, unless you like that sort of thing, you know. But if we just set the scene, you probably remember years ago ATV. ran from 1956 to 1981, then became Central. It always started its programmes like this, and this is going to be a bit loud on that last one. Yeah, but this is how the programmes always used to start. That was my favourite one. When I was little, my mum and dad, who were sitting at the back, will remember I used to fill sketchbooks with that all the way through. You know, some people like to draw, you know, little bits and pieces. That was all my thing. I've still got quite a few of them. When about 5 years ago, any of you remember Tiz Was, Saturday mornings. I mean, that was my sort of favourite TV show as well. They did a reunion programme in 2007. They had to do it in London because the Birmingham studios were in such a state of disarray, but they showed that last one, you know, the big colour spots and the massive fanfare, and everybody in the audience, massive round of applause, massive cheer, and they released it, they showed it on TV and released it on the DVD, and that cheer is still there. The producers then said that they weren't expecting that, but it just shows you how things stick in people's memories, as it probably does, you know, with you as well. But the programme we're talking about is ATV Today. It ran originally from 1964 to 1981. But before it became sort of the proper news and features, topical features show that they were talking about there, it was a short daily bulletin with a weekly, more gentle picture magazine, sort of probably on a Friday night, and that was called Midlands Montage, and we'll show you a little bit of that. As well as the nightly bulletins, ATV showed weekly features programmes, like Midlands Montage, which contained filmed reports about Midlands life by reporters such as Lionel Hampden and Jenny Martin, often looking at the quirky side of things.
Midlands Montage was a weekly magazine programme. And that was part studio, part film.
Midlands Montage, oh gosh. Well, that started even before my time. 59, I should think. I think I appeared on it once, and the Midlands controller at the time, Philip Doughty, said, "We don't want that chap on again." But I survived.
Here in Oldbury, there's a lot of demolition work going on just now, and of course it's hard to keep the children away from the ruined houses. But for obvious reasons, these are dangerous playgrounds, and this is the sort of thing that can happen. We've come to these houses in Oldbury for a particular reason. There's been talk this week of another danger to children. Half-starved wild cats are supposed to be roaming the ruins. But this was the only one we could find, and he's well fed and fat as butter.
Well, I've had a crack at most games, but I must admit that this is the first time I've had a go at Skittles. And this is Skittles with a great big difference, because this is the only completely automatic Skittle alley in the whole of England. Now, Mr. Teakle, you're the man responsible for bringing this fantastic contraption into the country. I'd like to know more about it.
Well, this is the first one in the country. In fact, I've only had it about 8 days. It is from America, where it has been a most fantastic success. Yes.
Were the customers men goggle-eyed when they first saw this huge electronic monster?
Well, goggle-eyed is rather an understatement. They regarded it as some kind of animal they'd never seen before. In fact, they delayed it for about 15 days before they decided whether it could even come in the country.
Would you mind telling me how much it cost you?
It cost £795.
What? Wow, that's a lot of money. What made you decide to spend so much on such a toy as this?
Well, I think I have a very good reason, and this is it. The Infantile Paralysis Fellowship. Now, I have devised a scheme where, when this game is being played, anyone who fails to score 300 is invited to place a silver coin in this box, and the whole of the proceeds, the whole of the contents of this box will go to the Infantile Paralysis Fellowship.
That's a very excellent scheme, Mr. Teakle. Would you have a game with me and see whether I can score under 300?
I shall be delighted, and good luck to you.
Thank you. is it?
288.
Well, it was a jolly good game, and I'm glad I lost. And I'd like you to accept this fun note from me to start your fund rolling.
Anybody got any earrings like that?
No.
They look like triangles, don't they, from sort of a band or something? That was about 1960, but by 1964 the format was a little bit dated. It was a little bit sort of set in its ways, you know. And they wanted a revamp. 1960s was sort of rolling on. Other regions were developing their news and features programmes. And so they came up with this idea for a weekly, for the weekly features programme to be extended to run every day and to combine that with the local news bulletin. And the whole thing was to be known as ATV Today. The first 20-minute ATV Today programme, broadcast on October the 5th, 1964, was presented by David Lloyd, Jennifer Gay and Kenneth Hill. It included studio items about the Great British Reserve, the opening of the Shropshire Star newspaper, and Gene Pitney singing It Hurts to Be in Love. Film reports included Jennifer Gay talking to a group of children about politics.
Do you know there's going to be a general election soon?
Yes.
Have you heard of things called political parties?
No. Well, there's Conservative, Liberal, Labour and Communist. Labour, Convertible. I don't know anymore.
Do you know who the Prime Minister is?
Yes, Sir Alec Douglas-Home.
And who's the leader of the Labour Party?
Mr. Harold Wilson.
Why is there going to be a general election?
For a new president.
Do you know who the Prime Minister is?
Sir Harold Wilson.
And do you know who the leader of the Labour Party is?
Harold Wilson.
If you could vote in this election, who would you vote for?
The Conservatives.
Why would you do that?
Because my brother said that the Labour makes all the rent go up.
How would you vote?
I'd vote Labour.
Can you tell us why?
Because we break up from school earlier with Labour.
I don't know if that was true. But now the footage that we've got in these DVDs is actually the original film that they used in those programmes all those years ago. In many cases, though, that's all that exists because the film inserts were kept, but the actual programmes that were broadcast, like the bits in the studio and all that, in most cases they weren't even recorded, but they still kept the film bits and pieces, which is why we had to show the script there with a bit of my narration, rather than, you know, the bits in the studio. These days, all of that film, it's still owned by ITV, but it's controlled by the Media Archive for Central England, I mentioned earlier on. And we work with them in order to put these DVDs together. And in most of the cases across all of the DVDs, the film hadn't been played since its original transmission back in the 50s, 60s and 70s. And the idea was, the way it worked was that via the magic of the internet, the film was played in Lincoln, which is where MACE are based. That's where their archive is. And then they transferred it across the internet to our editors, our group, ready to begin editing it into the programme. And they did it all just on a couple of computers, a couple of laptops. We all shared it around, watched bits and pieces, made suggestions how we could do something better. And then it all got compiled together, sent back to MACE, and they put it all onto the DVDs. But back when ATV Today began, although, you know, more topical news took prominence, there was still room for the odd and quirky stories and the odd and quirky presenters. Mentioned them earlier on. Remember John Swallow? Let's have a look at him in his early days.
You're quite sure fairies are around here, are you?
Oh, I'm quite sure there are thousands of fairies in this wood. Oh, yes, thousands of them.
Well, I haven't seen one yet. What should we see? Should we hear anything, or...?
Well, normally, fairies, when they move about, give it a tinkling sound, and they appear as in miniature human forms. And that's, if you can see fairies, you see them in that form.
Well, you've been keeping an eye open for 40-odd years looking for fairies, but you haven't seen one yet,
No,
have you?
I haven't, that's quite true. Of course, I haven't got that particular fairy vision.
Why do you believe in fairies?
Why do I believe in fairies? Well, it's like this. There's been a tradition of fairies for centuries, and lots of people, thousands of people say they've seen them. Whether that's fact or fiction is another matter. But the very fact that photographs have been taken in recent years of fairies, genuine photographs, that seems to me to clinch the subject and to show that fairies are fact and not just altogether fiction.
Well, if we can find one today, it's going to be a bit of a job. What shall I see?
Well, if we saw, I'm sure there are thousands of fairies in this wood, but if we saw a fairy, it would appear generally as a miniature human being, about 12 inches tall.
With
like
wings
that.
on it?
Some have wings and some have not, but they'll be dressed in draperies imitating human beings.
Well, you lecture in fairies at night and you teach chemistry by day. What do your pupils think about your beliefs?
I'm afraid some of them are very sceptical about it. They think because I haven't seen one myself that I oughtn't to believe in them. But as I tell them, I haven't been to New York, but I've seen photographs of New York, and I've known people who've gone to New York, and I believe in the existence of New York. The same way as fairies. I've seen photographs of fairies, I know lots of people who have seen them, and therefore I believe in fairies.
Well, quite frankly, you haven't convinced me yet.
Well, look here, let us go along through the woods and see what we can see.
All right.
There are thousands of them around here.
All right.
Come along.
Well, I wish we could see one.
Oh, well, we'll try.
Oh, I love it. Anybody ever seen a fairy? No, strange that, isn't it? We'll come back to John and a few others a bit later on. Now, the early local ATV shows were produced at a converted theatre in Aston. You know, the Aston area of Birmingham. Most programmes of the day, including Crossroads, were actually made on the stage in the auditorium, and they kept the auditorium in use for game shows and programmes like Thank You Lucky Stars. I discovered my mother-in-law had seen Cliff Richard on stage in that theatre, and she got a photo of him getting an autograph just outside. But the company was expanding, as they do during the 1960s, and they built a massive office block right on the side of the old television theatre, and it's still there. During the 1970s, the same building became home to BRMB, the radio station when it first launched. And then they moved into the city centre in the late 1990s, I think. As I say, the main office building is still there, but the theatre and studio areas are long gone. But the reason that ATV ultimately left the Aston studios was because of colour television. They needed better facilities for what they needed to do, and so in the late 1960s they bought a site at the end of Broad Street, just opposite where the new library is in Birmingham city centre, and they built their own studio complex, and it was officially opened in late 1969 by the Queen's cousin, Princess Alexandra. We've got a clip of that. During 1969, ATV was moving from its old studios in Aston to a new purpose-built studio centre for the age of colour TV.
We went into colour in '69 and in the new building, and the first thing we noticed, of course, was makeup. The whole, we were all being painted, because it was early days working in colour, and the lighting was different, and it was very exciting, but very different.
The studio centre on Bridge Street in Birmingham was officially opened on the 19th of March 1970 by Princess Alexandra.
Would you look after? Yes, yes. I work in the MACE room. Just came back to see you. And it's downstairs at the bridge.
They've never showed me. Well, next time I come back, let's I can see a bit more.
Operating from this well-equipped centre, Associated Television should have little difficulty in maintaining their high reputation for programmes of interest and entertainment. My very good wishes go to everyone who will work here.
The plaque, located in the artists' waiting area, was unveiled by remote control. This was viewed by the assembled guests on closed-circuit television.
I must give him a penny, otherwise we fight.
We'll go back to later. Thank you so much, Richard. We are so grateful to meet again.
Around about then, it all became one programme, and the news and the magazine became pretty well a sort of unified thing. So there would be the headlines, but then the news became almost part and parcel of the programme.
The merged news and features programme was briefly known as Team at 6, but soon reverted to the familiar title ATV Today.
Just in case you're wondering how Princess Alexandra fits into the royal family, she's still around. Apparently she's 76, and she's the sister of the present Duke of Kent and Prince Michael of Kent. I didn't realise that, I looked it up. So yeah, she's still around. The idea was she cut the ribbon and a big plaque opened and everybody applauded. And the chap who was looking a little bit worried with the bald head just on the right of the screen, that was Lou Grade, who was the founder of ATV. The ATV Centre was, as I said earlier on, the subject of our first DVD documentary. It traced the history of the famous studio complex. We went all over the country to interview people who used to work there. We went to visit Jim Bowen up towards the Lake District before he became ill recently, and we went down to see Chris Tarrant at the Elstree Film Studios, which is where they do Millionaire in Hertfordshire. And without exception, we found them all really friendly and just really enthusiastic to give their memories and their thoughts of each other. I don't think anybody really had a bad word to say, unless it was in jest about other people. And the same was true when we came to put together this second DVD, the ATV Today story. And this time round we were lucky enough to actually go to where ITV is today, ITV Central in Gas Street, and film in the Central News offices, which is where most of the indoor shots of people talking are based. And you probably saw early on we got Nick Owen and Bob Warman in there, obviously rivals these days, but we got them together on the same day, actually in the same chair in the offices. And the closer thing you think, because they go back a few years, they went to school together when they were younger. They actually went to school together at the same time. These days the company is known as ITV Central, that's what they call it, because everything is now ITV after all the the takeovers and everything. Studios are in Gas Street, which is just a block away from the old ATV Centre, which is still there, although it's in a completely dilapidated state these days. And the whole company these days, just to give you an idea of how television's changed over the years, they built the ATV Centre as a massive production complex, but these days in the Gas Street building, the whole company occupies half of the middle floor, and that's it. That's just the the way it's changed, and the main thing that they do these days is just the local news programmes. But back in the early 80s, ATV had become Central. They needed to expand further into the East Midlands, and they built a studio complex on the Lenton Lane industrial estate, and so most programmes then were transferred over there. So they got 2 production blocks running at the same time. If we go back to the 1970s on ATV Today, there were many big local stories which made national news as well. We'll look at some of those a little bit later on. But I think, shall we catch up with what John Swallow's up to? There's a couple more films which we'll show you before we take a short break. We'll look at St Peter's Church in the middle of Wolverhampton.
Well, it's extraordinary what some people will do. I don't really know what's going on here in Wolverhampton this morning, but there are about 7 people covered in talcum powder from head to foot, looking very ghostly, pretending to be dead. Now my thought is, because they got paint on their fingernails, that they could come from the art college. But it's not rag week yet, it's not for a couple of months yet. They're trying to draw attention to something. And the antics of the public, trying to get them to wake up, is something which is causing some amount of amusement. You can't wake them up. I'll try to talk to them. We'll try and talk to them again in a minute. Let's go and try and talk to them. What are you pretending to be dead for? Do you know we've got a camera on you now? You're trying to draw attention to yourselves for some peculiar reason. What happens if I tickle you? Will you smile? I wonder if you're ticklish. There's not a glimmer of a hope with this one. See, you can push him about. Look, see how floppy he goes. See? Well, there's a young lady next to him. Her eyes are blinking a little bit. She can't be there because her eyes are blinking. Look, can you see that little blink there? Are you ticklish, love? No, you see that? See, if I pushed her a bit, she'd go over the top. Oh my God, but I won't do that. No, I don't know really what they're trying to do, and I can't understand why they won't tell me anything, you see. You all right? Okay? A bit cold down there, isn't it? What are you doing this for? I mean, some people might think you're a bit silly doing all this. What do you think? Are you going to stay here for long? What do you think they're up to?
I really don't know. I have no idea at all.
Have you tried to wake one up?
No.
What do you think?
It's probably a ragweed protest or something.
It's not ragweed, is it?
No, not yet. I look through to something down there.
So you can... See, he won't move, look. Does anybody know what they're doing? Is it your lad, this one? Hey? You haven't come with him?
No.
What do you think it's all about? Does anybody know?
Probably something to do with Ireland, is it?
Something to do with
Some
Ireland?
demonstration for it.
Well, I can't think what it could be, though, can you?
No, unless, of course, it's to draw attention.
What do you two know about this? Well, you were sitting here, apparently, when they arrived.
Yeah, that's right.
Did they, how did they get here?
Over there.
They walked in, did they?
Yeah.
Then what did they do?
They just, looked around and just lay down.
They never did find out what they were there for. Went back to the studio, nobody knew, and that was it. And there is another one. You remember earlier on they were talking about the ATV Duck. Do you want to see it? Yeah.
John Swallow was reputedly responsible for the creation of another sport featured on the programme.
He and the late Peter Green were getting rather drunk in a pub in Ulster, and this lady has got a pet duck, the landlady, and Swallow says, "That's a racing duck." She said, "What do you mean?" "That is a top racing duck. We've got one at ATV today." And she said, "Have you?" There are no cameras there, they're just having a drink. He said, "We'll have a race."
She's a nice little thing, Ben.
Yes, she's a beauty, John, yeah.
How's she coming on?
Very well, very well.
When you say very well, I mean, is it a very fast duck?
I think so, yes. I think it is. Well, we'll see shortly, shan't we?
The sort of speed she's getting up now is
It's good. Yeah.
a steady speed, is it?
Yes, yes.
So I'm a bit worried. You know what the locals are like here? They say you mustn't show your hand too early.
Well, we shouldn't be doing this, really, should we?
Well, you know, I think if the full speed hasn't been achieved yet, we're all right.
No, she can go a bit faster.
Can she?
Mm.
Right.
Okay, John.
Steady, steady, steady. What's he doing? Get him up, Ben. Bill Freeman, you keep the ATV Duck at home.
Yes.
In the garden.
In the garden, yes.
Apparently he's got no pool there. He's got an old bowl with water in it.
Just got a bowl for him. That's all. Just to.
He'd probably swim a bit better in the bowl.
Well, he's more used to a bowl than he is a river.
You could see that this morning, couldn't you?
Well, I don't think he's very interested in the fast water. That's what I think it is.
What do you think of the ATV Duck?
Rubbish.
Ray, you're one of the leading duck racers. I'm feeling a bit disappointed with that effort.
Oh, I'm disappointed this morning, but I think it's you camera people like, and these few people that's here this morning. Yeah, I think we ought to race him upriver instead of down, which it will be upstream on the day of the races, you see.
I see. Looking forward to it, Ray. What, early in April it'll be this?
No, it'll be later than that.
It's got to be all organised.
It's got to be organised properly. And we get our beer tents down here and our sandwiches and...
It's an event that could draw thousands of people.
Well, it could do, yes.
So they advertised this race, the pub, and 10,000 people turned up at the banks. And there was the ATV Today racing duck in ATV Today colours. Nothing happened, of course it wasn't. They weren't racing ducks. I don't know what a racing duck is. And 10,000 people went home on this bank holiday really disappointed.
Well, under starter's orders. A lot of fractious ducks in the stalls, and they're away. Clay Hannah's out second. He's up in front alongside with Abby Habit. The last out was Nellen Avarak. At this stage again they're all very close, but the leader is definitely Abby Habit. Abby Habit, who's really speeding up now. And here we have ATV's owner following them, John Swallow. What a privileged man he is. Mr. Scott is swimming. John Swallow's been drowned over. This is the best one so far. They're doing well. It looks like Abby Habit. Now I can tell you. several objections going on, several objections. They've all been overruled after careful consideration.
Right, we'll take a break there, but when we come back, we'll talk about some of the more serious stories that happened during the 1970s. And there we go.